community for a substantial amount of time knows that, this is great, for any community, but we just want to know what are the plans for the future. Now I'm going to turn it over to Doug because he probably have some questions too.
Okay, well, first of all, it's a privilege being part of this conversation. I live at 4336 South Oakenwald, which is almost right behind the Muddy Waters house. I've driven past it daily for 20 years. And of course, my concern is just what Donna is asking is how do we elevate and resurrect this property, not just through landmarking, but how do you put it back together? How do you restore it? Are you going to use it? So, the neighbors around here, I think, would be almost unanimously in approval for this project. But the day-to-day reality is how are we going to live, side by side? And what is your vision of this property? We're very interested to hear from you as to how you intended to bring it from its current state of dearth into this magnificent, monument to Mr. Muddy Waters. I mean, it's just an incredible project. I don't think anyone would dispute that, but we want to hear from you as much as we can, as much as you're able to answer questions about what we're going to be seeing once you have this property under the project management of, I assume, are you, Mr. Ellis, are you part of the management team of?
Doug, I'm sorry, just a moment. We wanted to do the presentation first, then we can get into the overall questions and things of that nature. So let's try to go through the presentation.
No problem. All right, I'm finished. Go right ahead.
Do you want me to go ahead, Prentice, with the presentation? This is Candlin.
Please.
Okay, great. Let me share my screen here. Okay, hopefully you guys can see that. Is it visible?
Yes, Candlin, we can. Maybe you could introduce yourself too.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Candlin Hahn, and I work for the City of Chicago at the Department of Planning and Development in the Historic Preservation Division. And with me today are my colleagues Deanna Cuvallo and Matt Crawford. And we hope to be able to answer any questions about landmarking, because we're the group within the city that does landmarking. And maybe questions about appearance with regard to the protected features of landmarking. So that's what this presentation is about, just going into the history and the reasons we feel it meets the criteria. So let's get going with that. So this 1891 structure served as the home of blues musician Muddy Water and his family from 1954 to 1973. And the hospitality extended to Chicago's blues community and musicians who came to record or perform in Chicago, made the home an unofficial center for the Chicago blues community, a community largely composed of African Americans whose gifts to the world not only shaped the future course of popular music and subsequent generations of musicians, but one which gave the world a uniquely American art form, which speaks to the incredible resilience of the human spirit. And you'll recognize this, of course. The home's located on the south side of Chicago in the North Kenwood neighborhood, 4th Ward. In 1993, the home was included as a contributing property within the Chicago landmark North Kenwood Multiple Resource District, a district which consists primarily of detached homes and row houses built from the 1870s through the 1920s. This home's significance, however, to the city of Chicago, the US, and beyond, rises above the level of simply being a contributing structure in a district. So staff have done research and recommended to the Commission on Chicago Landmarks that the history associated with this individual home meets the requirements needed to qualify this home as an individual landmark with a distinct era of significance that deserves to be recognized, protected, and celebrated. The owner agrees and has consented to the proposed designation. So in landmarking, we have to meet 2 criteria, and the specific criteria met by this home include this one, which is a criteria regarding heritage. So blues musician McKinley Morganfield, better known by his professional name Muddy Waters, was born in rural Mississippi, the son of a sharecropper. His migration from the Mississippi Delta to Chicago in the middle of the 20th century mirrored the journey of many African Americans who left their homes to flee the Jim Crow South to find better opportunities in northern urban centers. They brought with them their culture and traditions, which enriched their newfound homes. When Muddy Waters and his contemporaries' musical heritage took root in Chicago and was amplified to reach ever larger crowds, the Chicago blues that emerged sent the heartbeat of America's culture around the world. The Chicago blues, created by musicians Muddy Waters, Willie Dixon, Howlin' Wolf, Sonny Boy Williamson II, and many, many others, would influence generations of musicians. They honed their craft in the blues clubs of Chicago, centered on the south and west sides. The club's clientele was predominantly African American, and many of the patrons had grown up in southern states where this music would have been familiar. These Chicago Blues Masters recordings first made the charts due largely to the African American audience in Chicago and across the United States. But their audience diversified and expanded across the Atlantic by the late 1950s and 60s. Events like the Newport Jazz Festival in 1960 provided national exposure to artists like Muddy Waters. And the folk music craze in England allowed Waters to tour internationally in 1958 and again in 1962. American blues became part of the mix of music that young musicians there sought out and imitated, influencing the sound of rock and roll as it emerged in mainstream culture, as acknowledged by bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and performers like Eric Clapton. By the early 1950s, independent record companies such as Chess, King, VJ, Chance, and Parrot, and distributors like United in Bronzeville were headquartered around Cottage Grove from 47th to 50th Streets. The home at 4339 was located near these businesses and the concentrations of blues clubs on 43rd and 47th Streets, such as the original Checkerboard Lounge at 43rd Street, Teresa's Lounge at 48th and Indiana, and dozens more, including Smitty's Corner and Pepper's Lounge, shown here in this image. In the years after Waters moved into the home in 1954, other music-related professionals moved to the nearby area. Soon Muddy Waters' home turned into a gathering place for other blues musicians and entertainers. Muddy Waters offered open-door hospitality at his 4339 South Lake Park home. Rehearsals were held in the basement. Musicians were welcomed at all hours. Not only food and drink, but lodging was also offered to traveling musicians. Fellow blues legend Howlin' Wolf stayed there as he resettled himself in Chicago. Chuck Berry, befriended by Waters, stayed at his home while in town to record at Chess Records. Visitors included performers like Buddy Guy, Coco Taylor, Little Walter, and B.B. King. So the second criteria that we found helped the home to meet individual landmark status is this criteria regarding its association with a significant person. Considered by many to be the father of the Chicago blues, Waters was one of the most important figures in the development of the distinctive electrified sound that came to be known as the Chicago blues. He had come to Chicago with an acoustic guitar, but soon found he needed to amplify his sound to be heard in clubs. So he bought an electric guitar in 1944. Muddy Waters skillfully married the raw acoustic Delta blues he learned in Mississippi with amplification to create a powerful new urban sound that could be heard in the loudest of Chicago's nightclubs and beyond. Waters' obituary in Rolling Stone magazine also noted, Muddy Waters would be remembered as a vocal artist of astonishing depth and power if he had never touched a guitar. Muddy Waters' recordings, like Mannish Boy and King Bee, became part of the standard repertoire of English rock and roll bands of the 1960s. Among these imitators were the Rolling Stones, who recorded their own versions of a number of these songs, and who took their name from a 1950 Muddy Waters single titled Like a Rolling Stone. Waters later acknowledged the influence of his music on rock with his recording, The Blues Had a Baby, and they called it rock and roll. Waters recorded with Chicago's Chess Records from 1947 through 1975. Recordings included hit songs, which reached top 10 R&B singles charts of Billboard magazine, including Louisiana Blues, Hoochie Coochie Man, I'm Ready, Manish Boy, and Close to You. 5 of his albums would make the Billboard Top 200 from 1969 to 1981. Waters and his work have been honored by the Blues Foundation, the Grammys, including the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, and he was posthumously inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1987. The story of Muddy Waters informs us of the history of the nation at large, and Chicago in particular, in the latter half of the 20th century. Chicago shaped his music, and he made Chicago synonymous with the blues. His home at 4339 South Lake Park served as the informal center of the blues community in Chicago and meets the criteria required to become an individual landmark for the city of Chicago. Last week, the Commission on Chicago Landmarks voted to preliminarily approve individual landmark designation of the home, protecting the features that are listed here. And as you can see, the features that we are protecting are those that were in place from 1954 to 1973, as best we can document them with historic photographs. And before I lose my chance to speak, I did want to put out a request. If there are people who have photos of this home from that era or shortly thereafter, we would love to have them to be able to further that documentation and get a better look at what it looked like. But some of the things that we know happened, that original basement entrance had already been there by the time Muddy Waters first resided in and then purchased the home. So we'd want that to remain. The exterior alterations, which were made by Muddy Waters, like the concrete porch, the exterior cladding of the bay, and the flat profile of the cornice, although right now some of those need some help, that period to which he brought them is the one that we'd be looking at to preserve. Ideally, if new storm doors were put on, we'd like them to match the flamingo storm doors that said Muddy Waters, that are such a popular touch point for this home and seen in historic photographs. But any other alterations which can be documented would be what we would use and in terms of the proof of what that home looked like. So hopefully that at least answers the question about what the home might look like. So I am here, Deanna and Matt are here to answer any questions you may have about landmarking or any of the protected features. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Doug and Donna, to continue the meeting.
You're on mute. There you go.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Thanks a lot for the historical perspective and the fact that you did put out there that you would love to see more pictures of the original house and how we can maintain that facade and how we can maintain some of the historical restorations that are needed in order to really capture what we want in the community. Given all that said, funding for this, do we even know funding sources to help bring about those restorations? Do we know that funding will even happen? And do we know what a plan criteria, like phase 1, we're going to restore this and we have funding for that, or phase 2, we have architects in place, or phase 3, yes, we understand that this house is going to be lived in, so therefore we do have all the necessary dollars in order to achieve that. Do we know any of that information?
Deanna, did you want to talk about what individual landmarking of the home would at least make possible with regard to grants?
Hello, everyone. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so with the grants that would come with landmarks, are the grants the only thing that we have to work with right now? Or do we have some additional dollars that are coming down the pipeline?
Good evening, everyone. This is Deanna Cavallo. I am also with the Department of Planning and Development. I don't know that I can answer your entire question. I believe the owner here can speak better to the intentions of, her intentions for the home and the type of work that they can propose and their intentions of what the use of the home would be. But I would certainly be able to speak to certain potential sources of funds that the owner could be looking at in the future for some of that work. But maybe the owner may want to respond to the first part of your question, if she could.
Thank you. That would help.
Thanks so much. It is my understanding this meeting is to only be about the landmark, and we're not presenting about the house today. If that is so, what I'd like to do is just go ahead and provide the website for additional details. I know that there is a lot of details there to share that kind of answer some of those questions that you may have. And then what I'll do is I can take those additional questions back to her for everyone to discuss at a later time. The website I'll include in the chat.
So Mr. Ellis, is Ms. Cooper joining us? We usually have the owner join us, as well as, I know she said she might want some other folks to help with the questions, which we're fine with. If you can allow that, if you can let us know who that might be. And then, part of the community process is answering questions. So I hope that you can answer as many here this evening as you can. And these are questions related to landmarking. They're not related to anything else. So we would appreciate that.
Absolutely. As my understanding is, this is essentially a meeting about landmarking. I'm not sure if we can clarify the questions that are relative directly to that. And then there are people that are on this Zoom that can assist with those questions for landmarking in particular.
Okay, so let us know who those are. And these are normal questions that we ask to everybody who's going through landmarking. So nothing, these are pretty standard questions. So if we can get answers to the best of our ability, that would be great. And then if you let us know who is available to answer those questions, we can elevate them, if that's okay.
Okay, give me just one moment. Let me just share this.
But the phasing, the money, how, those are all questions directly related to landmarks and questions that we ask of all homes that are, considering landmark status. It's nothing new.
Okay, thanks so much. Okay, so you had requested the individuals that were on the Zoom that could assist landmarking and also Preservation Chicago are on the call to be able to discuss landmarking questions. I would go back and saying that I can't disclose or discuss a plan at this time for the questions that are being asked in reference to the museum. I'd ask that we just kind of stick with landmarking. And if you can clarify those questions, then I'd be more than happy to take those back and try to get some additional answers.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not.
I'll let Ms. Feaster and Mr. McKeever, but no one asked questions about museum. These are specific landmark questions.
Okay, so I know you guys are looking for community approval for landmarking. We do not have a problem with landmarking at all. We understand with landmarking, other things come into play, funding and things of that source, but with the approval of landmarking, we would like for the parties who have ownership of the Muddy Waters House to bring proposals to us so that we can see that they are meeting the landmark criteria, that they are following the city guidelines, that they are moving forward to create a scenario where the community actually sees some movement on this property. Doug, you can chime in.
Yeah, and I think just to, continue the line of thought that Donna has presented to you, Mr. Ellis, is that, the house has been in disrepair for a long time. And, there's a lot of concern with some of the people who've had to contend with problems at that house. And so the questions regarding how we're going to transition this house in its current state to what you do envision for this, including the landmark process itself, people have questions about that. But I do have a landmark question in particular, and Ms. Hahn, you might be able to answer this, is, the landmarking process itself, where are you going to be satisfied the landmarking portion of this project is done? Do you care about what happens on the interior of the house? I mean, how far do you go with the landmarking aside from the external, detailing, and, where is it over with landmarking?
So the features that landmarking, the features that would be landmarked are only on the exterior. We would not landmark any interior features. And anytime a building permit is applied for at the city, that's done through Department of Buildings. They tag landmark buildings with a little flag saying we need to get a release from the landmarks division. So that comes over to our neck of the woods. We review the work, make sure it's in line with the basic commission guidelines and standards, and then we lift our hold and the permitting process continues. So that's what we would be protecting, and how, and kind of the mechanism for how we do that with any landmark structures.
Okay, has there been any kind of loose time frame that you've been working with to get this project started?
Absolutely. So last week, the preliminary landmark recommendation was made to the commission, and they voted affirmatively. The next meeting of the commission, they meet the first Thursday of every month. So at the next meeting, what's called for by the ordinance is a report from the Department of Planning and Development to talk about whether this fits into their planning schemes for the city, specifically for North Kenwood. And then at the following meeting, because we have the agreement of the landmark, of the potential landmark owner, we would go back to the commission for a final landmark recommendation. So they would vote then to, presuming they vote affirmatively, that's a recommendation with that, which then goes to City Council. City Council has its own process with which Alderman King is very familiar with, but essentially in a period of roughly 2 months, they introduce the potential ordinance. It goes through the zoning, landmarks and building standards committee. If it's approved by there, it goes back to the City Council for a complete vote. So from beginning, if we consider last meeting the beginning, the end process is approximately 5 months in total from beginning to end, assuming there's no hiccups.
Okay, and then does the city then want to see a sign in front of the property that discusses the status of the landmark designation, or will there be a plaque attached to the home?
Good question. There is a provision in the ordinance that asks that all landmark properties do have a plaque explaining the history. So staff at our division, once a property is landmarked, then work with the homeowner to find an appropriate place to put that plaque. We requisition it, have it created, and then install it. So that can kind of be an involved process, because we want to make sure it's in the right place, and that the owner is on board, and everything is going to be good for it to remain there.
Okay, and while I don't, just want to, out of curiosity, is Landmarks dealing with a ownership of one person, or is this an LLC, or what are we really dealing with here with the representation of the ownership?
So I do a little bit of research, and the ownership is the last deed that was recorded was to an individual,
Okay.
Ms. Chandra Cooper. So we've been talking to her. She's the owner, and she's the person who has given the permission for this to move forward. So no
Okay.
LLCs, no big corporate anything. It's her.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you, Ms. Hahn. Appreciate that.
Sure. Thanks for the questions.
Hi, back with Landmarks. I know this was in the past when we had CCC. We really depend on Landmarks to work with us in the North Kenwood Oakland Conservation to keep developers and homeowners within the perspective of the North Kenwood Oakland Conservation. So with that time frame, we used to tell people anywhere from 4 to 6 months, like you just said, for the whole process. After that 6-month period, if we see a lag in development or a lag in movement, what are our next steps for as far as the North Kenwood Oakland Advisory Council, you know, in the community? If we just see, we got the placket, we got the landmark status, but bam, nothing else happens.
Speaking strictly from a landmark designation viewpoint, there is nothing in landmarking a home that requires that work be done on it. You know, it would be treated as other homes in the city are, you know, subject to building codes, subject to, you know, the Department of Buildings kind of oversight like they do every building in the city of Chicago. But in and of itself, the landmarking does not require work to be done to the building. So that's, hopefully that clarifies that.
I think that's good information you just gave us so that the community has an understanding. So when we do have our community meetings and they bring to the table, what about, you know, the Muddy Waters house? Because we've had that brought to the table many, many times. And so people will have a great understanding of what you just said, you know, that the landmark status is important, but it doesn't mean that they have to move on it as fast and as quickly as the neighborhood might want it to. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. Mr. Ellis, can you divulge what's your role in the this project?
Well, at this point, I'm just supporting Ms. Cooper because she had an emergency. And so that's why I don't mean to not come off so brash, but I don't have any additional information beyond any like landmark details. And that's why I was saying that. Just as a heads up, I do know she is planning to maybe schedule a follow-up communication with everyone just to kind of go over and disclose some additional larger scale details. But if you didn't get the answer that you're looking for tonight or the reassurance, let me reassure you right now, there is a plan and she does have that in place to be able to communicate with everyone.
Okay, so moving forward though, future meetings, will you be present for those?
I could potentially, if she, just given the little knowledge that I have in regards to the project and the museum, I most likely will kind of fill in if needed. But she has been able to attend normally, just had an emergency pop up.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
Okay, I don't have any more questions. Just moving forward, I agree that landmark status should be applied to the Muddy Waters house with provisions of seeing restoration coming about as quickly as possible, but that's to be determined by Ms. Cooper. But landmarks is something that we really would like to see, you know, for this particular location.
Second that.
That's great. Glad to hear it. Thank you so much.
turning it back over to the alderman or to Prentice. I don't.
Yeah,
have
I
any-
think there are questions in the chat. What we said we would try and do is to try and get take community questions first and then questions at large. It's hard to tell, you know, kind of who's in the community, who's not, but so I'll try and just take the questions as we see them in the chat, and then whomever would answer. I don't know if that's Mr. Ellis or Ms. Hahn, if you guys can just distinguish, you know, who wants to take that, but I will try and go down the questions in the Q&A as well as in the chat. Okay. So as they're listed here, let's see. So there's a comment by Elisa DeChiera of Landmarks, Illinois. It just says, and I think people can read that, but both Landmarks, Illinois and National Trust for Historic Preservation provided grants for roof stabilization, which was recently completed. That may help answer some of your questions from earlier, Ms. Feaster and Mr. McKeever. Another comment, most questions have little to do with landmarking, budgets, uses, accessibility, not relevant to landmarking. What is the next phase of landmarking? By Mr. Mims.
I can give that a quick answer. So we've got preliminary. We're going to hear Department of Planning and Development report in July. We're going to get a final recommendation to the commission in August, and then we would get that to City Council hopefully by September or October at the latest, and that would then come back around to go through the committee and get to zoning. That would either be then October or November. So hopefully that's specific enough.
Okay. I would like to know more details about the rehab, upkeep, and additional investment to maintain the facade of the landmark property. Someone who lives close by. Is that a Mr. Ellis question, or is that Ms. Hahn?
Mr. Ellis, did you want to have Lisa DeHira of Landmarks, Illinois, since she was so and the organization was instrumental in securing that grant from the National Trust, talk about the work?
Yeah,
Please.
we can elevate her. Is that good? We'll do
Yes,
that right now.
yes, please. Absolutely.
Great. Mr. Butler, can you elevate Ms.
Absolutely,
DeChiera?
right now.
Okay. And while you're elevating her, let me go to another question that may be more specific. Okay. I think you shared the website, right, Mr. Ellis? That was in it. Yeah, I see that. Okay, my
Yes.
bad. You've already shared that. Thank you for that. Someone says, is there a public list of questions, expectations, those wanting to do business in this ward can access? This way, each entity that comes before this community can be prepared. So, you know, Ms. Feaster and Mr. McKeever have been, you know, doing this for some years. I don't think there was ever a public list of questions because it's always been open to the community. So while the advisory council has their list of questions, we always open up the questions to the community, and they're never screened. So it's just what, you know, whatever the community chooses to ask. That doesn't mean it has to be answered, but these are very public forums, and you know, we try and have that type of transparency. So Mr. Chira, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Can you tell people?
That's okay. I'm used to
Say it one more time. I'm sorry.
DeChiera.
Okay.
okay.
Sorry for butchering that. Just
No, it's
let
okay.
people know who you are, and then if you can speak to any any questions that you have more specificity on, that would be great.
Sure. So I'm Director of Advocacy for Landmarks Illinois. Many of you may be familiar with our organization. We're 50 years old this year, which is why I have our vintage logo standing behind me for circa 1971, which does overlap with one of the years that Muddy Waters would have occupied this home.
Right.
So anyway, one thing I did put in the chat box was, again, just to clarify that one reason that we all believed that this individual landmark designation for the Muddy Waters home was important to pursue, even though the building is already contributing it to the North Kenwood multiple property district, and therefore essentially already protected and already comes under building permit review with Deanna and Matt and Candlin and their staff. So none of that changes by virtue of this individual landmark designation. Those processes are the same. The only reason that we all agreed, city staff, Chandra, Landmarks Illinois, because we've been assisting Chandra, as has the National Trust for Historic Preservation, our two organizations, is because it really then helps bring the focus to the very specific period of significance, years of Muddy Waters ownership and years, he and his wife together and their family, and years of occupying the home. You all know from living in this neighborhood, if you've ever read the North Kenwood Multiple Property District Designation Report, it's all about these homes built in the late 19th century through the early 20th century. And even though that report does reference Muddy Waters owning this home, though we know those critical years of the 60s into the 70s, and that he made physical changes to the home. And he made physical changes to the home that maybe the average homeowner would then, if they bought this home, would change back to the late 19th century, or its, you know, its period of 1891, as Candlin noted, its year of construction. In this case, with the individual landmark designation, we're acknowledging those changes that Muddy Waters and his wife made to the home. So you all are familiar that the front porch was modernized. You know, the wood carved original porch was replaced with a more modern porch in the late 60s. The wrought iron railings, the awning, as Candlin noted, one of the most wonderful features that they changed was adding those storm doors with the pelicans that are just, you know, they're so charming. You know, there was some other changes made to the bay window, to the cornice, things like that. It was, you know, it was a modernization like many of us do to our homes, whether it's interior or exterior, in different ways. So this individual landmark designation allows an acknowledgement of those later changes and makes the point that they are just as important now to preserve with the ongoing efforts to rehabilitate the home. So the home will be rehabilitated. I think this was a question about the facade. Any facade rehabilitation that will take place will really be in accordance with Muddy Waters and his wife's years of living there and what it looked like during that time. So that is the focus. And it's a wonderful thing because it acknowledges that cultural heritage of the property, not its 1891 earliest period, but its most significant years, which did have those changes to them. I did put in the chat earlier, Landmarks Illinois did provide a grant, as did the National Trust for Historic Preservation some months ago, and already the roof was stabilized already with those funds. Many of you may know, because it's been in the press, because Deanna, Matt, and Candlin's department does a wonderful job of publicizing this. There is a wonderful program called the Adopt a Landmark program. And so this property is eligible for applying for that funding, like so many other wonderful landmarks in our city. And we'll be assisting with that effort. So I hope that helps.
No, I think it does. I mean, it's, you know, you're saying that there are resources that have already been provided to stabilize the home, and you're saying the most likely be more to come, with the status.
Yes.
So
And I think
thank you.
And again, the website was put into the chat box where people can see that additional information.
Great. We'll stay with us just in case there are questions that you may be able to answer as well as we go down the line here. Okay. Lost my place here. Okay, here we go. Once landmarked, what obligation does the owner have to secure, maintain, restore the property? Does landmarking, quote, protect the owner or the property, I assume? I think someone answered that earlier, but if someone can just kind of zero in on that and reiterate what was said earlier.
Hello, Alderman. This is Deanna. If I could attempt answering that as well. In addition to what Candlin previously explained, just like any other property in the city, we do want to focus on landmark properties and making sure that there are certain provisions in the code that would require that the owners maintain them. So it is something that is mentioned in the landmarks ordinance in the municipal code, that at least that there are some consequences if the property is just let to be deteriorating and falls apart due to negligence. So there are code provisions to protect that, but Department of Buildings has inspectors, and the Department of Buildings is the department that would enforce any violation notices like with any other property. So those are the facts of the municipal code that certainly do apply.
Thank you for that. Next question. Well, more of a statement. Can we get rid of the X, the red X? I thought the X was gone. Is the X still there? It's not. Okay, so yeah, that's gone. A comment which may be helpful: organizers should consider approaching list.org for community development funding and development assistance. This is a really long, I'm not sure if it's a question, but it says project phases and costs. The project expenses were estimated by the Chicago-based preservation architecture and engineering firm Klein and Hoffman, who donated their services to support this project. Great. What do you know what those are? I'm not sure. And then the firm's architects conducted a building condition assessment, site visit. I'm sorry, Mr. Ellis, you're going to jump in?
They are listed on the website.
Okay. Great. And if someone, since this is like kind of a public meeting, if someone just has them, it would be great if for people who are listening, if you can just provide that information, especially if it's readily accessible on there. But we'll put the website information back in the chat again as well. And this person may have gone there. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say the information that was shared was actually in reference to a question that had been previously asked.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I'm just going back through all the questions. So the website may have been shared again, but if you can, or if you have direct responses, it's great, especially, for a community meeting. This is obviously different with Zoom, but I will tell you, we get more involvement, from the community, and more people coming. So I think, again, they're getting specific, and maybe all of these are referenced in the website, as you said, Mr. Ellis. Okay. This is a comment that you made, Mrs. and I'm going to the chair. I know I'm pronouncing that wrong. And I just want to recognize that your chairman, Ms. Rand, is also in the audience. So just wanted to shout.
And a constituent of the ward, yes.
And a constituent of the ward. Can't leave that out as well. Anything that can bring life and activity to the neighborhood is greatly appreciated. Someone said we can't see those questions. Oh, from the Q&A. So we will go through the Q&A as well. All right, so I'll go to those, and then if they're redundant, we won't need to. Okay. Will there be a grand opening celebration inviting the community?
Yes, yes, there will be.
Okay. Do you know what the anticipation of that might be?
What has been discussed as being planned is an actual formal hosting to present to the community based on some of the questions that were shared tonight to kind of answer those questions. And in addition to that, we'd share additional details for how the grand opening would be.
Okay. Can the city of Chicago elaborate on the exterior lower entrance? There is a front side and a back lower entrance. I know you answered it in the Q&A, but some folks said they can't see that. So Ms. Hahn, if you could just briefly, even if you want to read your response there, that would be great.
See if I can remember it. I just said there's on that front elevation, there's the two entrances. So the one you walk up the steps to get in the main entrance, and then that lower level one that would have gone straight into the basement where rehearsals were held. So we've determined that those are elements that we want to remain. Typically when you landmark a structure, although all elevations are protected, there's usually a primary elevation, secondary elevations, and even tertiary. And oftentimes changes are allowed on secondary elevations, and especially those elevations that are not visible to the public right of way. So we would really focus on that front elevation. Hopefully that answers that.
I think so. And I think, yeah, this one isn't relevant really. Ms. Cooper wanted to sell her home. Would the city of Chicago buy that? That's generally not something that the city of Chicago does. But she certainly is welcome to sell her home, as is any, anyone who owns a home. That's her right. I think that's it. Let me make sure I did not miss any questions. There's a statement by Ms. Robinson. I think it's important. Love the Mojo Museum name. What can we do to advocate for this site receiving Adopt a Landmark funds from neighborhood developers? I think that's part of the process, isn't it, that we're going here, but I'll let someone on the team answer that.
Hello, Alderman. This is Deanna again. I can certainly speak in general terms regarding the Adopt a Landmark Fund. We just recently, at the end of May, opened up the applications for the application round for this year. And the department, as well as the Landmarks Commission, established a funding priority for this year to focus where the funds would primarily target. So really the funding priority for 2021 is neighborhood anchors and neighborhood commercial buildings. In addition to that, there were established 7 criteria by which, or evaluation criteria by which applications would be evaluated. It is a competitive process. It's not, so we would basically look at each application, determine how well it meets these 7 evaluation criteria. They're not in any particular order of importance, but the more criteria something application meets, the higher up in the evaluation it is placed. One of the criteria is that the department and the commission would prioritize projects that are in the Invest Southwest, in qualified investment areas where there has been less investment. So all of these would be evaluated at one time. The application deadline is August 16th. And the department is also holding an informational webinar on June 16th, where anyone who is interested in hearing more information or maybe looking to apply for a property that they may think would qualify could sign up, and we would be able to answer questions specifically about that.
Okay.
Let me just add to that, we have been looking and waiting for this grant, and our intent is to apply for this.
Okay. That's good. I think we went through.
Oh, I was just gonna say, Alderwoman, there was one question in here from someone about ADA, and I was gonna say maybe.
Oh, I did see that.
Maybe Deanna could just answer that from a design review perspective, how they deal with that with landmark properties.
Okay.
So obviously accessibility is very important. And there are different ways architecturally that may be handled. Each case is, you have to evaluate it case by case. What is the best way to provide access without really necessarily adversely impacting what is most significant about the property? So when we actually review plans, we do coordinate our review as well as the architect's conversations with the Mayor's Office of Disabilities, so that we can find a solution that would address all of those concerns, landmark issues as well as accessibility. So we have not yet seen drawings for this property, so I couldn't really give you specific response to what would be a scheme for this case.
Okay. Hopefully that answers that particular question. All right. Yes, Mr. Mims said thank you. All right. I think that exhausted all of the questions. Is there anything else that either the department or the owner through Mr. Ellis would like to say?
I'd start by saying I do apologize. I know Ms. Cooper also shares in that sentiment. She did have an emergency, but I do want to reassure the Landmark Association. I know that there were many questions today around the museum and some around the landmarking. There are answers out there, and we also do have answers. If you didn't get the answer that you want, feel free. There's an info page on the website. Feel free to write us. And we'll do our best to get those answers to you sooner rather than later. Also, just sharing that we are in the process of planning an informational session to kind of walk through some of those plans with the community, because we do understand that the community is what holds up these types of projects and landmarks. And so all of those questions are valuable, and we want everyone to know that and that we are ready to answer those questions, and we'll share those details in that informational session. But also to thank everyone, especially the team that were able to fill in on those questions for me, and also for everyone's time and consideration for this project.
Well, great. Well, thank you. DPD, any parting words or?
I would just say if you have any questions, you're welcome to contact staff. I can, why don't I leave my email in the chat area in case anyone has any other questions. But we also have a website, cityofchicago.org/DPD, which stands for Department of Planning and Development. And you'll see a link for historic preservation. And when you look at supporting information, there's all kinds of info about standards for landmarks and how can I research my home and all kinds of things. And the preliminary designation report will also be uploaded to that page this week. So you can take a look at that at your leisure.
Well, great. Well, thank you. Just want to thank everybody for their time this evening. This is definitely, like we've said, and I think a number of people have mentioned, a home that deserves to be elevated to landmark status. We're sorry the owner couldn't join us. We look forward to talking to her again, and sorry about her emergency. And so we will follow up with everyone. Just, want folks to know, if you can, Ms. Hahn, just kind of reiterate the process. So there was an initial recommendation by the Landmark Commission to move forward. They will seek our recommendation, meaning my office's recommendation, the community's recommendation. People can come to those. They are public meetings. They can also speak there. I normally have meetings in my community, not via Zoom. This is probably the first landmark one we've had via Zoom, but certainly we engage our community to to ask questions and to see how they feel about a project. And such as you've heard here, Ms. Feaster and I, Mr. McKeever, I don't even know if they want to mention how far back they go in the community, and have landmarked or recommended homes to be landmarked, developed for over a number of years. Definitely precede me in my time, and I've only been here about 5 years, but I would say probably at 20 years, maybe, Ms. Feaster, at least, maybe more, probably. So I want to thank you guys, as well as the rest of the North Kenwood Oakland Advisory Council. But if Ms. Hahn, if you can just leave us with the process again. It's, there was a recommendation from the Landmark Commission, and then it'll go back to Landmark Commission, I think a couple more times. I believe they then will make a recommendation to City Council via Landmark Committee, and Landmark Committee, as well as the City Council, will look to me as Alderman for my recommendation, and I will get that recommendation from the community. So, but did I miss something there, Ms. Hahn?
Alderman,
Hold on
thank you.
one second, Mr. Ellis, and then I'll go right to you, I promise. But I just wanted Ms. Hahn to see if I,
Yeah,
okay, good.
I just included the website for general information about landmarking.
Okay.
And you said meetings are open to the public. That last URL is for people who want to request to speak or submit anything in writing. We'll get that to the Commission on Chicago Landmarks.
Great. And Mr. Ellis, I'm sorry, you were trying to jump in there. I apologize.
No, my apologies. I just had one question that came to mind as you were discussing. You said that there were two entities that offered their recommendations, one being from you and then from the commission. Just kind of wanted to understand if I could capture, if I have your support for the landmarking moving forward. And if there was a way or a time frame that we'd know kind of how we could expect from the community, and then also.
So I definitely want to hear from Ms. Cooper directly. We'll go back. I think we have a public meeting on June 22nd, so we'll probably have something before this. But as you know, this is a long process. I've already told you how I personally feel. My community, I want to hear from them directly. I think they wanted some more questions, as you know, answered this evening, and I think there'll be time for that. But the process won't be delayed by our office, or, like I said, this is generally a 6 months process. The Ebony Jet took 1.5 years, but we know there wasn't a lot of support for that. Unfortunately, not like here, but I'm happy that, there is support for this and other homes like this now. But it could take, it should take, hopefully on average, about 6 months. I remember that's about what it took for the Essex building, which is right down from the Ebony Jet building. So you should hear from us very soon. But we definitely would love to hear from Ms. Cooper, and we understand the emergency, but hopefully she can make some time for us. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I do want to say again that the North Kenwood Oakland Advisory Council will be meeting on June 22nd to talk about this as well as other projects that are happening in the ward. And so if you're interested in being engaged and joining the North Kenwood Oakland Advisory Council or any of the other 5 advisory councils that are in the ward, we've got, Kenwood, Douglas, Grand Boulevard, Hyde Park, South Loop. We seek engagement all the time, not just on development. So these are our development co-chairs or our chair. I say co-chairs, but I think Ms. Feaster, you are the chair of the development committee, but I know you and Doug have been working hand in hand over the years. But we also have other subcommittees around safety, around economic development, around schools, around arts and parks. So please, if you want to get involved in your community, please join. You can reach out to our offices. There is information on the website. We encourage really communities to be empowered locally, and we listen. And so please reach out to our office if you would like to get involved or engaged in any one of those ways, or there are advisory councils that have created their own subcommittees as well. So you may bring some unique proclivity to the advisory councils as well. We welcome that. So thank you. Thank everybody for their time. We appreciate you coming this evening and look forward to elevating this home, as I said, to the status that it should be. I've mentioned during during the Landmark Commission meeting that was held a few days ago. My time just, that I hail from the Mississippi Delta, not far from where Muddy Waters is from. My grandfather considered himself a crooner, Thomas Johnson. He was known by Cush in the community. And, I know he's looking down and is proud of his, I'll say it, his homeboy. That's what we would say, but certainly in the most respectful way that can be said. But he certainly would be proud of everything that he has done and has given to not only the city, but to the world, really, in terms of his music and the legacy that's there. So we look forward, as I said, to elevating this home and to the resources that will come to it because of that. So thanks again, everybody, and I appreciate your time. Have a nice evening.
Thanks, Alderman.
Thank you.